slideshow. Worked. Yeah, we had a little bit of IT challenge here. So it's nothing like restarting your computer when all else fails. That's what we learned. So, as Patrick said, I've been involved with the DMC EDA for a number of years. I've been on the board. And I've also long been interested in the impact of pandemics on cities. Actually, the first article I wrote about this was back in 2010. And I've gone back, actually, that article now has been translated into several languages because, and I don't think it was really anything that was particularly brilliant in what I said, except that a lot of what we're living through was predictable back in 2010. These kinds of impacts that pandemics have are profound, and we tend to forget about them because they happen about every 100 years or so. And so we frequently don't realize how much they change our lives. And because they're global, they also have enormous impacts across the world, obviously, as we are all learning. So, I'll just go back here. Oh boy, all right, let's get back here. So as Patrick said, I have a book coming out in May from Routledge on the post-pandemic world. This is, again, the result of over a decade of research on this. And at my center, we've also been doing a series of webinars. We've been doing research on the post-pandemic impact. And we've looked particularly at commercial corridors. And so I wanted to talk today about the impact on retail specifically. A lot of what we know about retailing actually was triggered by past pandemics. And a lot of what we will be experiencing going forward in retailing is also going to be very much affected by pandemics. The pandemic itself ends relatively quickly. The 1918 flu pandemic, for example, actually took 2 years, and there were several spikes in that. And so what we're going through right now is pretty much what we experienced from 1918 to 1920. And so the pandemic ends, but the impact of the pandemic on how we shop, how we live, how we work, how we learn goes on for decades and decades. And so that's what we all now need to start thinking about. I also will say that if we understand the effect of pandemics, the opportunities are enormous. So they're incredibly disruptive, but virtually all of the great things that we know in retailing, for example, the department store was triggered by the 19th century cholera pandemics, and I'll talk in a minute about why. And so again, a lot of what we now know is a result of this. So let's go to that cholera pandemic. What pandemics do is they accelerate us into the future. So they're rapid accelerants. So things that were marginal prior to the pandemic all of a sudden become dominant. What happened in the 19th century is that we saw cities prior to that pandemic as essentially large villages. People still had outhouses in the backs. People still were throwing dirty water right into the street. And of course, as a result of that, we had a lot of water, contaminated water, which spread cholera through our cities. And so the big shift that happened in our thinking after the 19th century is that cities are somehow different than a village. It's not just a big village, it's a different kind of thing. We had to invest in water infrastructure. We started to require indoor plumbing. Once we required indoor plumbing, we could start having bigger buildings. People could live closer together. So the whole idea of the industrial city was in many ways triggered by a pandemic. We also saw the rise, as I just said, of phenomena like the full service department store and bricks and mortar retailing itself. Prior to the early to mid 19th century pandemic, a lot of retail was done out of people's houses. People were still making things and selling things out of a home or maybe a general store, but it was retail at a very small scale. The idea of retailing as we now know it really emerged in the wake of this pandemic. And so, again, here's an example. The pandemic ended in the United States roughly around 1854, but the impact still continues with us. We still have dense cities. We still have department stores, although it's interesting how this pandemic has certainly affected that form of retailing. And let's also then look at the 20th century influenza pandemic. This was the first time we started to talk about masking, social distancing, and this also prompted an acceleration of suburbia. In other words, people started to want to have their own cars, not go in a trolley car. People wanted to live in single-family homes, not in high-density multifamily as much. Of course, people continue to still do that, but what happened is we had automobiles prior to 1918. We had single-family homes prior to 1918. What happened after that is there was a widespread increase in demand for that. So we saw banking reforms. We saw the rise of the modern mortgage system. Prior to 1918, if you wanted to own a home, you had a 5-year loan and a 50% down. So people who had single family homes prior to 1918 were pretty wealthy. After that, we had mortgage reform that now led to the 30-year mortgage, the 10 to 20% down that we all now live with. Again, triggered by the desire for people to live further apart. And in fact, the side yard requirement in much single-family zoning of 6 feet was based on the 6 foot that you were supposed to stay away from your neighbor. And so something as simple as the social distancing in response to the flu pandemic gets buried right into our zoning codes. This, of course, in retailing led to the rise of suburban shopping, shopping malls, and all of the other policies. So with that history in my book, I then start to talk about, well, what can we anticipate going forward? And that's what I want to talk about today, and also talk about the implications for retailing. So as I said, pandemics are accelerants. We are now in somewhere around 2040 to 2050, and we did that in a year. That is a profound shift in how people are accessing goods and services. It's a huge shift in how we are learning, working, living. Pandemics also reveal dysfunctions and inequalities, as we have also seen in the wake of this, or in the midst of this pandemic, I should say. Where there are inequalities in access to healthcare. There's this division in our economy between those who can work remotely and those who are essential workers and have to work in person. And so it also showed, in this case, the failings of our healthcare system, the failings particularly of our public health system. And it also is, it demands that we do some paradigm shifting, because you never go back to the way it was. And that's the kind of maybe the biggest shock, is that, 2019 wasn't that long ago, but it is gone, and we will never go back there, because we're somewhere around 2050 now, 2040. We are several decades ahead. One of the other things that's interesting about pandemics is it also shows how quickly we can change, how rapidly we, for example, went to remote. In my case, the entire university, I had colleagues that said, oh, we're never going to go online at the University of Minnesota. We went online in a week. And so one of the things it shows societies is if we want to change, we can change quickly. And so a lot of things that we thought were slow, incremental, that may take generations to change, we're now realizing, well, wait a minute, if we change that quickly in the wake of this pandemic in terms of how we're working, how we're teaching, how we're learning, why can't we change other things, right? And so there's a huge social demand for change. And this happened after all the other pandemics as well. So we need to also embrace change. The worst thing you can do after a pandemic is want to go back or pretend it didn't happen. That is guaranteed to lead to a failure of your business, a failure of your institution. And so it demands that we all stay open to the kind of uncertainty that comes in the wake of these pandemics. So what was the impact of this pandemic? I argue in the book that this is a profound rebalancing of the digital and the physical world. And so one way to think about this, I was thinking about this on the way down from the Twin Cities this morning. So we as humans have existed on this planet for about 200,000 years. And for 95% of that time, we were hunters and gatherers. Only in the last 5% of our human history did we start to have permanent settlements and build bricks and mortar, right? And that was about 10,000 years ago, right? So we are now living in that. And we existed in that 10,000 years, 95% of that time, thinking that we were essentially in local and regional economies. And in the last 5% of that 10,000 year time in permanent settlements, we went global. About 500 years ago, we started to expand basically into a global economy. We had the age of exploration. European countries and then countries around the world started to trade globally. So we've had a global economy for about 500 years, right? 5% of that 500 years, 25 years ago, we went digital. The internet arose, which is a profound shift, because not only did we have a global economy, but now we can interact globally without physically being there, right? So we've been in this digital economy for 25 years. 5% of that time is this pandemic. And this pandemic is another shift. It's the shift toward being virtual and viral. And that is huge for us. Viral, because we are now in a single global viral community. Look what's going on with Omicron right now. It arises in South Africa. It's now spreading rapidly within days around the world, as we saw the Delta variant happen, right? So we are essentially a single community, a single global community. And the virtual side of that is that one of the things we learned in this pandemic is that we can stay home and have almost everything delivered to us, right? We can shop online, we can have services, we can telecommute, we have telehealth. We do not have to leave our homes. 2/3 of the American economy now comes out of people's homes. The last time that happened was the early 19th century. So this is a huge shift. And what's also interesting about pandemics is they not only accelerate us into the future, they revive things that we used to do. And so now we're seeing that over half of American businesses are now out of people's houses. So, and again, that was the last time that happened is when we lived on farmsteads and in households prior to the 19th century pandemic. So this shift is a major global change in how we will all operate going forward. It gives us choices about what we do in person or remotely. I mean, I'm on Zoom. It's great to be here, good to be in a room with everybody. I could have done this from my house, right? And so the fact that everybody now has a choice about doing something in person or remotely for the first time in human history requires that there's a reason why we get together in person. It's not the default. One of the things that was interesting about the last 25 years is we've had a lot of this technology, but we still had an older mindset. Well, to go get goods, I had to go to a store. To go to work, I had to go to the office. To learn, I had to go to school. We had the technology prior to the pandemic that allowed us to have choice. We just simply didn't have the mindset to think that we had choice. But the pandemic showed us is we actually all do have choice, virtually all, not everybody. There's obviously inequalities in access to the internet, high bandwidth access, some households that can't afford digital technology, and those are really important things that we have to solve. However, it is, and again, this issue of making sure that we don't ignore those kind of inequalities because essentially everybody's going to demand the same kind of choice. And this is a global phenomenon. This is not simply the United States. So what does it mean? In the post-pandemic world, it will continually be this hybrid between the digital and the physical. And it will mean that we'll are going to all have to ask, why do anything in bricks and mortar? I mean, actually, it turns out it's pretty convenient to shop online and have Amazon deliver it to our door, right? It's pretty easy. And so why get in a car? Why go to a store? And so what the physical world is going to have to now do for the first time ever in our history is give people a reason. Think about what the online world can't do, and that's what we will need to do in person, right? And so it's going to need to provide experiences. It's going to emphasize the importance of interaction. In moving away from a store where you just go to get goods, I think that function of retailing may really dramatically decrease. You can just get ordinary things delivered to you. Why go to a store? Well, maybe there's an interactive aspect to it. Maybe the store is as much about the community of people that you want to see. The person running the store who is a friend or a colleague. It has to be distinctive. It has to be memorable. It has to be something you can't get by staying home. This is, for example, is an image from IKEA. They're exploring the idea that you don't just come to IKEA to look at the furniture. You can use the furniture. They have sleepovers now in IKEA. They'll serve breakfast in bed in IKEA, right? In other words, it seems odd, and that's what's so interesting to me about these post-pandemic situations. They almost seem funny to us, but this is exactly the kind of creativity that needs to happen to get somebody to want to come to a store and to experience the goods that are available there. And in fact, I think one of the general conclusions I talk about in the book is that retailing, the bricks and mortar side to retailing, will be the place where you come to touch and feel things, but it may not be the place that you actually go get the goods. The goods may get delivered to you. In fact, probably just as fast as if you went to the store and brought it home yourself. We have a retailing research group at the university that is looking at how major retailers are reimagining the allocation of goods, not in highly centralized stores. In fact, one reason Target did so well during this pandemic is it basically reimagined its business and said, we're no longer just in the retailing business, we're actually in the distribution and curation business. And they realized that once you make that mental shift, all of their stores became distribution points as well as points to go shop, right? And one reason it did very well, particularly in competition to Amazon, the 800-pound gorilla, is that Amazon had more regional distribution centers, while Target had Target stores closer to populations, so could get goods to people faster. The next evolution of that are the goods are going to be on autonomous trucks in our neighborhoods, delivering with the kinds of goods they know that people in that neighborhood want, and they will deliver it to you, to all of us, about as fast as we can order it. And that's coming. So again, bricks and mortar in the old way of thinking about it is going to have a very hard time competing with the convenience and the speed with which the new distribution, the digital distribution of goods is going to be happening. And so I think basically we have to reimagine what happens in bricks and mortar retail as a result. So I have here a series of quotes. There's the largest architectural firm in the world, Gensler, that has a big research arm. And a couple of weeks ago, they came out with a really interesting report on the future of retail. And I have the URL there. And I read through it and thought that some of the comments by their people from around the world, they work in cities all over the world, about trends they see happening in retail might be of interest here. So again, they reiterate this point that the digital and the physical will continue to blend. They note that, for example, we're moving into the future of retail AI. And just as I said, in terms of how distributors and major retailers are looking at the use of AI to predict what people want to buy even before they know they're going to buy it. AI is now getting to a point where it knows pretty much what to expect people will need and want, and will be organizing the goods in a way to meet those needs. This idea that particularly a younger population, I'm sure many of you have seen this in your stores, they go to the store to check out deals, but they're also on their phone, and they're looking at where else the deals are. We're also seeing now retailers compete with that, where as you're walking by, it will offer, in the next 5 minutes, if you come in the store, you get a 50% or a 30% discount or whatever. And so, retailers also have to utilize the same technology to draw people in, and do it in a way that is compelling in terms of how short the time frame is to, again, get people into the store. But this point that this John Bricker makes, it's all about unique experiences. And even to the point where it may matter more the experience you're offering than the kinds of goods that you're offering. I mean, that's fine. Goods are fine. The specialized kind of retailing is fine. But if you're not offering a unique experience from the store next door, you're not going to get people in, because they can probably get everything that you're selling online. And so, again, it's as Target said, they're in the curation business. They're not just in the distribution business. They're in this idea of combining goods in ways to meet certain kinds of customer needs. The rise of not only AI, but augmented and virtual reality is coming. And again, the Gensler people who are really working with retailers around the globe see this in a big way, where one of the reasons why this is important is that this is another reason to come into the store. In other words, where you can see yourself in a different kind of environment. You can interact, the rise of what's called social VR, where you can interact with your friends all in a different environment. So you can put on an article of clothing and then walk down a street in Venice, see what it feels like. In other words, the store becomes a new kind of reality. This, by the way, is being discussed in the film industry. It's been struggling with the problem of Netflix. Why go to a movie theater if you can stream a movie at home, right? The same kind of problem. So what it requires is reimagining what we do in a theater. And so one of the things that's being worked on right now is that we're not seeing a movie in the movie theater, we're in the movie. You come into a room like this with virtual reality goggles on, and you're in the movie. The movie's happening around you. You're an avatar in it. You're a part of it. You're a stand-in in it. Now, obviously, it's virtual, so you can't actually affect what the characters are doing. But the thing about that is, think about that. You can see the movie many, many times because you can be in different places in the movie. You can see the movie from many different perspectives. And so this is how the physical world will be competing with the digital online world that gets streamed to people's homes. And again, it has to be immersive. It has to be dynamic. Remember that word near the bottom, phygital. That's going to be the characteristic of almost everything we do now, is that there will be, and that's not just in retailing, every office is going to be phygital. Some things need to happen in person, in physical environment, and some things will be digital. Over 80% of the workers during the pandemic, in several surveys, said that they want to continue to have the ability to work at home at least some part of the week. And what was even interesting is when employers were surveyed, it was over 90% thought that their people were more productive if they work at home, depending on what they're doing, some days of the week. And so when you get both the employees and the employers at that scale saying this, we are in, I think, a long-term transformation. In the book, I mean, I'm talking about retailing here, but in the book, I spent a lot of time talking about the office of the future. The office of the future will be much more home-like, in the same way that the home is becoming more office-like. So as we do more work at home, also the reason to come into an office is not to sit in a cubicle from 9 to 5. In fact, the idea of the office cubicle may end because there's no reason to do that. Sitting by yourself at a computer is much more effectively done at home or some other place of choice. If you don't have space at home, there's the rise of what has been called neighborhood clubhouses. This is a booming new business, which are places in neighborhoods for people who don't want to go to the office, but don't necessarily have space, or maybe they've got kids at home, or there's some reason they don't want to be at home. There's a third place. In fact, the coffee businesses, the Starbucks of the world, are reimagining their business, saying, instead of us thinking of us as providers of coffee, maybe what we really are third place workplaces, of which coffee is just a kind of lure to get in. Right. And so we're seeing these neighborhood clubhouses emerge where you can have subscriptions, or you can, just get charged by the minute or the hour, and it gives you access to technology, gives you meeting space, gives you quiet workspace, and good coffee to boot. So again, one of the things we saw in past pandemics, that we'll see again in this one, is whole new kinds of businesses emerge. And that's what I said at the beginning. There are so many opportunities that come out of pandemics. If you're open to what's happening and try to understand people's new kinds of needs, we will have whole new industries emerge out of this. We're seeing this expansion into the metaverse. We've all seen what Facebook has done. But the idea of retailing, connecting to apps, games, non-fungible tokens, another term that you probably, if you haven't heard about it, you should hear about it, because it's also going to be a big part of the economy and also a competitor to more formal goods. And so, we're starting to see stores that look like this, where you come and you also have digital experiences in the store, where there might be video games, 3D video games, utilizing the goods that are available through this retailer. Pop-ups of all sorts, the idea of retailing not being so fixed, but utilizing space as it's needed, a kind of sharing economy way of thinking about retailing. And also one reason, this interests me in my center is that we do a lot of design thinking work, and design thinking is a way to help us all think in paradigmatic new ways. It's just a way to open all of us up to looking at analogous experiences that maybe aren't from our industry, but that are relevant to our industry. So, for example, we've been finding that there are aspects, for example, this is an Amazon store. So if you go to an Amazon store now, an Amazon bookstore, it's not organized like a typical bookstore. It's organized like the Amazon website. And what it is an amazing experience, actually, because they have relatively few books, but they've curated the books based on what they think people who read one kind of book, all the other books that person will like. So in the same way that Amazon does this online, the store now does this. And what's amazing is that, if you go in there, most of the books you may not like, but if you see one book you like, you'll probably like the other 5 that they also have right next to it. And so this idea of retailers as curators is really important. In fact, the whole idea of the curator, which we now think of as some person who works in the back room at a museum, is going to be one of the main activities for almost everybody, that offices are going to have to be curated. We're going to have to think about what are people's different needs and how do we rearrange the office to meet those needs. Retailing is going to be one of the biggest curatorial activities. How do we gather goods in a way around a person so that we understand what their life is like, and maybe what are all of the other kinds of goods that they need. So this may be the future of department stores, which is, rather than the 19th century idea of the department store, which isn't working very well in the economy anymore, is to think about a store like this Amazon store, where you come in and let's say you're a single mother, right? And you've got a cluster of needs, and the store has curated all of the kinds of goods that you would need to make your life easier. And so that is, again, something that I think is going to be much more of the kind of responsibility and opportunity of retailers. Let me find my arrow here. There we go. There's also going to be a lot of attention to sustainability, to resilience, particularly among younger people. And this too is something retailers have to take seriously, because now everybody has choice. They have options. They don't have to come in a store anymore. And so why come to a store? Because you feel that the store represents your values. It's something you believe in, that the store is doing things that you want to see happen in the world. That's why you go to a store. Otherwise, stay home and have Amazon deliver it. And so paying attention to that is really important, and creatively thinking about what that means, and this idea of traceability of materials, looking at what happens to your goods after their useful life. Working with designers to think about goods in new ways. One of the things we thought about, we weren't successful in pitching it, but when Macy's was closing the big Dayton's, or the former Dayton's department store up in Minneapolis, we said, it's at a point where, and our retailing faculty showed us, and our apparel faculty showed us how you can make bespoke clothing as cheaply as you can buy it from China and have it shipped over. And so the proposal was that you go to a department store and you pick out the fabric, you get measured, they make the article of clothing there on an upper floor, you get to meet the designer, you get to meet the people who are making it, and you sell it out of the store. In other words, the store isn't this part of this long global chain of production and transportation. We now have the ability to do all of that locally. And this is happening really quickly. It's happening in the auto industry. One reason the auto industry is moving to mobility services is we are now capable of 3D printing cars. And once you 3D print a car, you don't need a big factory in Detroit anymore. You can make a car in Detroit Lakes, Minnesota, just as easily. And so this idea of extreme localism, of production happening in locations, is both an acceleration into the future because of digital technology, and weirdly enough, also a sort of recalling something from the past, which we used to make things locally. And so this is what pandemics do. They send us in kind of both directions and lead us to sort of reinterpret what we did maybe in the distant past in new high-tech ways. So again, being open to that and thinking about how retailers might think about the production differently is important. This idea of community, the notion that a bricks and mortar retail is really about the community, is also really important. Again, something that doing this in physical space matters. So the idea of using the retail store to support, sponsor community activities, community events, a place where you can come together with friends. Restaurants, for example, really obviously struggled a lot in the pandemic. And one of the things I talk about in the book is the need for restaurants to reimagine the original purpose of restaurants. So restaurants as a type happened just prior to the French Revolution. The first restaurant, sort of modern restaurant, is in Paris. It still exists. It's been in business since before the French Revolution. And think about the name. They were a place that you went to get restored. And the original restaurant was not a place just to get food. We had inns to do that. You came to a restaurant to find a community of people who you liked and agreed with. Actually, one reason the King of France many reasons the King of France got in trouble. One of them was he shut down the restaurants because he thought that they were places where people were fomenting revolution. Turned out he was right. They did foment the revolution. They overthrew the King of France. And after he was overthrown, the restaurants opened up again. But it showed that there was another role to come to a restaurant, which is to have conversation, not just with maybe the immediate person you're eating with, but with others. So the restaurants were curated events. And so in my book, I talk about maybe that's one of the ways restaurants reimagine themselves, It isn't simply a place to get food, because you can obviously get it delivered at home just as fast. And a lot of restaurants have survived, obviously, by allowing us to take out, right? And that will probably continue. And that's probably a good thing for restaurants to continue to do. However, why come into the restaurant? Because there's something going on there that you can't get at home. And what that is completely open to imagination. And it can be co-designed with the community in terms of, well, what would you like to see happen in this place? So we're starting to see stores that look like this. They don't look like sort of typical stores. They're not full of goods. They're full of space and activities and events. This idea of live streaming events, this is also a trend where the store is in a place where you just come physically, but people log into the store to see what's going on. In the same way that, I don't know, I assume there are people who are logged into this event right now, right? So we will constantly see everything happening in the physical world. You have to think about what's the digital community that I can also connect to, right? And so this, again, sort of reimagining stores as event spaces is, I think, where there's concerts, live talk shows, festivals. These are things that the Gensler people are seeing happening around the world. And this idea of the store is also a delivery point. Now, we've seen this with Target. We've obviously have seen this for a long time with IKEA. So thinking about this, every store is a kind of hybrid between the experience in it, as well as the ability of the store to also be a rapid delivery point for people. And this idea of partnering, this notion of blended spaces, of co-branding, of smart partnerships. This is, I think, where a lot of department stores are seeing their future. It's not the 19th or even 20th century department store. It's a place where there's a lot of co-branded activities going on. And we're seeing, as this bottom quote talks about, we're seeing banks that are turning themselves into co-working spaces with cafes. So one of the things to do, and this is what creative people do just generally, is take things that exist and mix them in hybrid ways, in new ways. I mean, what happens when a bank is also a co-working space? Well, it turns out that might be quite good for the bank and their customers. So look for those opportunities. This idea of simplification, of not having lots of inventory, but highlighting your inventory in ways that make it extremely appealing. And with the employees in the store being consultants, not just simply the person to take the good and ring it up, but to actually be the knowledgeable person who can help people sort of see how this fits into their larger lives, is, I think, also another reason why people would want to come to bricks and mortar stores. But also thinking about how the footprint doesn't have to be as big. If you're not holding a lot of inventory, you don't need the same kind of footprint. So we're going to see, as we will see with offices, we're going to see with retail, smaller footprints, a kind of return actually to the 19th century store, the smaller store. And again, maybe this is an important one to kind of end in, which is, be local, stay relevant, be personal. Again, this new economy, the digital world is going to be very much a transactional economy, right? You go onto Amazon, you buy things, you don't know anybody. The bricks and mortar experience is to know people that care about things that you care about, that believe in things that you believe in, that care about your community, that provide space. This, for example, is a new Nike store where you co-design Nike shoes. And they use the store as a way to get new ideas from their customers. So what it does is it turns us not into just passive consumers of what some Nike shoe designer thinks we want. It actually uses the store to gather our ideas so that they can make sure that their design products are meeting our needs. And so we're all co-designers in the retail experience, and the store becomes the place for that. So, and then maybe finally, I'll also just make a point of what happens outside your store. A lot of what we talk about at the EDA is the public realm and how that is also changing. One of the things that is Interesting about this pandemic, if you can call it interesting, is that it coincided with some other big changes. For example, we've been rapidly automating a lot of work. There's a lot of work that is being turned into software. In the book, I talk about, what is left for us as an economy are actually the things that were true of the pre-industrial economy, which is the jobs that will thrive in this digital hybrid future are jobs, I think of them as the 6 C's. They're caring jobs, community jobs, communication jobs, creative jobs, craft jobs, construction jobs. And those are the jobs that existed prior to the Industrial Revolution. And essentially, one of the things that's happened during this pandemic, it's accelerated us out the back end of the Industrial Revolution. We are rapidly turning over to machines everything that we're not particularly good at or don't want to do, because machines are much better at doing repetitive, boring, or dangerous work. We're not, and we should let machines do that. And we should focus on what humans are good at. And so that's one thing. And one of the most dangerous, boring, and predictable things we do is drive. So the auto industry is rapidly moving into mobility services where it will completely change our transportation system and change the nature of our roads and our public realm. The good thing about that for retailing is there's going to be a lot more space in front of your stores for things other than just lots of cars going by. Parking itself is going to change. We're going to be rapidly moving in the next decade or so into essentially vehicles dropping us off, picking us up on demand. Because that's where the car companies are going. Much more profitable for them, much less costly for us. And so cities now spend about 30% of their land storing vehicles. So there's going to be a lot of land available to do other things and a lot of space in the public realm. So the idea of thinking about how your store spills out into the sidewalk, what can happen out in the public realm, what other kinds of things can happen in the public realm that draw people physically to your block are all opportunities going forward. So I'll just end with some questions, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have, but to think about what are the opportunities that you see in your business based on these comments I've made, and what specific steps might you take to sort of grasp the opportunities that this pandemic has created. And if specifically for Rochester, how is this an opportunity to continue to build on the brand of this city? I think one reason I continue to stay involved and excited about Rochester is the idea that it's a city with a brand. Not many cities have that. This is a perfectly situated city, not only because of it's the brand of the Med City, but of your size. You can do things that much bigger cities could never do. And just think about, okay, all of the things that I talked about in terms of the brand impacts inside retailing, think about what that means for the city as well. And how do these same strategies work for Rochester? I think there's tremendous opportunities here to do things. So with that, I can just close or open to questions or what do you think, Patrick? Thank you.
So you can see why we are so fortunate and value Tom's participation on the DMC EDA board and all that he has to offer. And I would invite, we do have a few minutes to field any questions that you might have. And Tom, if you're willing to stick around, I know that in this fidgetal world that we're in, you are going to fidget over to our office and teach a class back in the university from our office. So I know you only have a few minutes before you have to.
11:15.
So
I'm good.
So go ahead, please.
Yeah. Right. Did you all hear? So the question really is the workforce question, which is, it is a fascinating issue. I mean, the great resignation, right, that's happening. I mean, some of this is simply people who, a big issue is people can't find childcare because a lot of childcare closed. So we do need to reopen the childcare system so people can go back to work. So there's some short-term things that can happen. But over the long term, in fact, I had two recent students who were gainfully employed, and right through the pandemic, they've recently quit to start their own nonprofits. And when I asked, so why did you quit this great job you had? And a lot of them have said, well, the pandemic made them realize they're not going to live forever. And the thing that they've always wanted to do is they better start getting around to doing it. And so we're seeing a shift, a structural shift in the way people think about work. And so what I think this requires of employers, retailers, or any kind of business or institution is to think about how can I make that work more satisfying and rewarding for people. And, you know, for example, maybe a lot of the routine work that people don't want to do just gets automated. We don't necessarily need cashiers perhaps anymore. Maybe their staff become the curators that I talked about. They become the experts who are in conversation with the people in your business. So elevating the kind of quality of the work is, I think, one way to get people to come back, because a lot of people now have choice. Just as we have choice about whether we do something online or in person, they have choice about whether they work in a bricks and mortar setting or they do something online. It's never been easier to start a new business online. That's the other thing about the digital world. A lot of people, we're also in an entrepreneurial revolution going on right now. The number of new businesses that are emerging out of this digital world is enormous. And so every bricks and mortar retailer is in competition with that. And so it's about the quality of the experience of your employees as much as your customers, and to curate that is really the way to get people to come back and work for you. But it takes a kind of reimagining. What is our business? What do people not want to do? And let's get that turned into software and automated as quickly as possible, because I'm not going to find any worker that's going to want to do that.
Other questions? I have one time. I'm sorry.
Over here. Yeah. Yeah, and I think it was mentioned in the previous session too. I mean, to me, what's really fascinating about the opportunity in Rochester is to be America's City for Health, a destination medical center. So how could all of or as many as possible of the retailers in this city think about health? And how are your products and your services related to health? And how can every business that has a health related product be lured here? I mean, you know, the Mall of America, you know, sort of said, if you're a retailer, come to the Mall of America because that's where everyone else is. Well, what if Rochester becomes the health version of that, where every good, every service, every business that has a health component needs to be in Rochester, because this is the place you go to find out about that. And also for those who are already here, thinking about your products in terms of health and your services in that way. So in other words, how does everything we do in this city build the brand? Because we already have a global brand, and it's a matter of all of us reinforcing and continuing to build on it. Yeah.
Well, great. Thank you. Tom, one question for you. Your book is coming out in May, you said, and I'm wondering, can we count on being on one of the stops on your book tour?
Well, yeah, I mean, in a way, this talk was one of the chapters in the book, but sure, absolutely.
So I think peeling back the conversation and the presentation, this focused largely on retail. I understand your book covers the whole spectrum, including workforce, including health services, right, including office. I think there is a lot that we can learn and benefit from here in Rochester, but I also think Rochester can be a model for the rest of the country, rest of the state certainly, and if not for the rest of the country. And I wonder if you wouldn't comment on that.
Absolutely. I mean, the very fact that we have the EDA and the DMC, and that the state has invested to this extent in this city, is an enormous opportunity. We're also seeing a lot of other money coming from the federal government that's going to build on that as well. And so the real opportunity, I think, for Rochester, and why I love being a part of this whole effort, is to think about what does the 21st century economy need, and how do we make sure we build the infrastructure that enables Rochester to sort of step over all of the others. Because the bigger cities have a lot more problems They have a lot more, infrastructural problems, other kinds of challenges that a city at this scale might not have. And so an ongoing conversation about trying to understand what this post-pandemic set of opportunities are and what kind of investments do we need to make to enable every business to sort of take full advantage of that, I think is the opportunity.
Great. Well, with that, please join me in thanking Tom Fisher for
Thanks,
his
everyone.
wonderful presentation. So we are going to go into a break. We have refreshments, opportunity to mingle and talk to the sponsors, people hosting tables, colleagues from the city. I mentioned staff from DMC again, just to point them out: Chris Shad, Scarlett Tippett, Mike Flynn, Gino Palazzari, Allison Bowman, Cody Pogles, Catherine Malmberg. Please make a point. Kevin Bright shrugs his shoulders, didn't get acknowledged. Kevin Bright, so now he gets acknowledged, especially Kevin Bright. I did mention elected officials here. I do see Councilmember Dennis as well, so feel free to knock on her door as we're walking around and chat with her as well. So we'll